Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I'm keen to find out a little bit more about that story involving Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert suing Facebook. Hopefully we'll catch up with him later in the programme, seeing as we were on the same University Challenge team just a couple of Christmases ago. I expect him to clear an enormous gap in his schedule to speak to us. I think it's too soon after the last one, isn't it? Good morning, by the way. How rude of me. I'm so sorry. It's 4 minutes after 10. I hope you had a cracking weekend. Remember to put cream on. Barbecued to your heart's content. Vegetarian barbecues are going to be one of my problems this summer. I'm not necessarily going to run that up the flagpole today, but be warned, it is something that we may turn our attention to subsequently during the course of the season. But I think it's too recently that we did paeans to marriage, homages to marriage. Today we learned that if you can stay hitched for 20 years, you'll end up even happier than newlyweds. Oh, happy days. Also looking at a very interesting story, two stories today involving the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The Times disclosed last November that David Cameron, you remember him, you sort of look up the word hubris in the dictionary and you'll see a picture of his hammy face, that David Cameron was setting up a UK-China investment fund with his friend Lord Chadlington. And then, shortly afterwards, Philip Hammond lent the venture official support in a joint statement with the Chinese government. Labour pressing a watchdog today on links between Whitehall and business to investigate whether the meeting last October broke a lobbying ban imposed on Mr Cameron. A little bit dull, but potentially quite interesting. The other story involving Philip Hammond is his decision, I think somewhat shamefully, to not put curbs on addictive betting machines. I thought we'd all reached a point last time we spoke about that where we felt that they had little choice, but then of course I guess big business and big bucks intervene, and lo and behold the Chancellor of the Exchequer doesn't do what most but not all of us agreed would be the right thing to do. Now, we need to talk about Brexit, or more pertinently, we need to talk about Ireland and the customs union. As I have been telling you for the best part of 2 years, it would all lead to here eventually, and we're pretty close now to the wire. I'll tell you what I think is the most significant element of what's going on at the moment. What I'll do, I'll give you my two penneth and then you give me yours. There may not be a sort of formalised question this morning. Seem to be having quite fertile exchanges when we don't box ourselves in on the tram lines that are drawn by very simple questions. So I'll tell you what worries me the most at the minute, just in terms of clinging on to the hope that people like me are horribly wrong and that there is some... I don't want to put it polite. I do want to put it politely, so I'll try not to say unicorn or anything like that. There is some relatively straightforward solution to increasingly large and urgent problems, okay? I obviously, I really hope there is, because we all suffer if there isn't. But what's really weird is not that people in government won't come onto this programme to explain what the state of affairs is regarding Ireland. What you need is somebody to explain explicitly and with both the authority and the accountability of government, right? You need somebody to explain how the Good Friday Agreement can accommodate Brexit, or indeed how Brexit, perhaps more pertinently, can accommodate the Good Friday Agreement. And it's fairly clear that they can't. So the two options that were put to the European Union are, well, bonkers on the one hand and just bad on the other. So I am beginning to wonder whether what they're just hoping to do is somehow wait for the British public to be persuaded by the government's friends on Fleet Street that the impossibility of having both Brexit and the Good Friday Agreement in place is somehow a choice that's been made by the European Union. This is where, in the absence of a proper explanation, you have to come up with your own. So it is not possible, okay? It isn't possible to have identical trading arrangements on both sides of a border when only one side of that border is in the customs union and the single market, unless the other side reflects almost entirely the rules of membership. And I kind of want to keep this interesting, and I'll tell you what is really interesting. The government won't put anybody up. So where is Michael Gove to explain how this would work? Where is Boris Johnson? Where is Theresa May? I really smell a rat, and I'm a little bit out of the loop on this because they'd never come on this programme. But why are programmes where government ministers could routinely expect, and indeed often do, get their tummies tickled? Why won't they go on those programmes? Why are the BBC and others reduced to booking Ian Duncan Smith or John Redwood or Lawson father or son? Why are we getting Hannons and Hoeys and not getting government ministers? Because government ministers are both responsible and accountable for government policy. Why won't members of the government come out and explain to you what the government policy actually is? And you can answer that question however you want, but I don't think you're going to come up with a very positive answer to it, a very optimistic answer to it, are you? Why are backbenchers and, I mean, at the very least, we could say slightly eccentric individuals in the Conservative Party the only ones now appearing, or you get some sort of hack economists or experts, as a bloke in the Mail today described as a leading economist, putting the boot in to so-called Project Fear. And I'll double check it again, I don't want to misrepresent anybody, but they appear to have written the entire article without mentioning that this leading economist ran for the leadership of UKIP a few years ago. There's all of the people that are coming forward to punt these positions are unaccountable. If it all goes wrong, how does John Redwood get punished? Do you see what I mean? If it all goes wrong, how does Ian Duncan Smith get punished? They don't have government positions. If it all goes wrong, how does Dominic Lawson get punished? Writing in the Sunday Times yesterday and the Daily Mail today that we should look to Switzerland for an example of how we can cope with the Irish border problem. Switzerland, a country that is in the Schengen area. You see what I mean? If a government minister said, oh, well, we can be like Switzerland, then a decent interviewer would say, but that's in the Schengen area. You're talking absolute twaddle, and the government would have to retreat. But if a government has to retreat, then the whole shebang falls to pieces. So, just thinking out loud, and I think I've put a caveat on almost every programme where we discuss these issues. I hope I'm wrong. But I think we're moving towards... I mean, there's probably another massive postponement on the way, right? Another extension of the transition period, which we have to ask the European Union to grant. I don't think we get to make that choice unilaterally, so much control. But I think, I've just read up a pamphlet, this is how sexy my life is, that Michael Gove wrote just under a decade ago about the Good Friday Agreement. And you could be forgiven for not knowing this. He didn't like it. He didn't like it then, and I don't imagine he likes it now. So you have someone in Cabinet who I think wouldn't admit this publicly yet, but I think privately might be comfortable with the jettisoning of the Good Friday Agreement. You're not going to get anything through the House of Commons as long as the Conservatives rely upon the DUP for their majority that would move the border to the Irish Sea. So for the first time since the referendum result came in, I can't see what's going to happen next without an election. Because even if, I told you I was thinking out loud. You better ring in, actually. I'm going to need interrupting in a minute. 0345 60973. This is it, isn't it? So I think that the tension is between now people... Everybody recognises that this can't be done. That's why the only people being put out there by Conservative headquarters or booked by the broadcasters are not accountable or responsible. Everybody in government, whatever they're briefing and whatever they're saying, everybody knows that you cannot. Even when they made these suggestions to the European Union, they knew they'd be rejected because you have to confine yourself to this programme to get a handle on it. But you will know if you've been listening for the last 6 months or so, when we've gone in quite hard on the Irish issue, it's simply not doable. Everybody in Ireland understands this. So they made these suggestions, one bad, one bonkers. They got kicked back again, as they knew they would be. They then set the Daily Mail and the Telegraph to work, seeking to persuade the British people that reality is something that the European Union have chosen, that it's somehow not Britain's fault or not Brexit's fault that we've reached this impasse. It's all the European Union's fault for not recognising they've called it the magical thinking of these border proposals. There could be a technological solution, but I'm told it's at least 7 or 8 years away, and there's absolutely nowhere in the world you could point to that would offer up an example or a precedent. So you can tell I'm a little bit reluctant. I'm worried I'm going to make an even bigger clown of myself than usual. But if I start with the really honest admission that for the first time in a long, long time, I don't know what's going to happen next. And whether you have enjoyed or hated my analysis over the last 20 months, I'm afraid everybody has to agree I've got almost everything right. And what I see next is the tension between people who are so committed to Brexit, and it will be a hard Brexit, that they would be prepared to sacrifice the United Kingdom. They would be prepared to countenance, if you would, either the de facto or the actual reunification of Ireland. So they're on one side of the cabinet. I put Michael Gove there, although the Conservative and Unionist Party is a title that they struggle to absorb. And then on the other hand, you've got people who would sacrifice Brexit, even if they voted for it, now that they realise it's impossible to do it without fracturing the union forever. Okay? But you can't do that in the context of cabinet, because the people who are prepared to sacrifice the union upon the altar of Brexit would still be relying upon the votes of the DUP to get that through Parliament. Okay, it's just beginning to coalesce now. Do you see? So even if there is a cabal in cabinet, and you'd probably put Liam Fox, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson will go whichever way he thinks is more likely to deliver him the keys to Downing Street. Thank God there are still some inalienable truths in British politics. So you've got one constituency who might contemplate sacrificing the union on the altar of Brexit. You've got the other constituency who recognise they might have to sacrifice hard Brexit on the altar of the union. They're the people who would probably lead us into a place where we genuinely do have to follow rules without having any say in setting them. And the former category, the ones who would sacrifice Northern Ireland on the altar of Brexit, can't do that because they rely on the DUP for their parliamentary majority, in which case, general election. Sorry, I'm with Brenda in Bristol on this one. No, another one. And that's me, all right? That's my two penneth. Remember, I'm not a specialist. I'm a generalist. You know, we might be talking about Facebook, marriage and fast food later. I'm not a exclusively political journalist. I read a lot. I listen a lot. I talk to you a lot. I have the privilege of listening to you a lot. But the bottom line is, you cannot observe the tenets of the Good Friday Agreement without having a pretty clear reflection on both sides of the Irish border of the trading arrangements in place on the other side. So if one side is in the customs union and the single market, the other side, even if it doesn't subscribe to those words, has to behave and act as if it is as well. Which would mean Wales and Scotland and other regions of the United Kingdom could turn around and say, well, how the hell have they been allowed to hang on to these brilliant credentials when the rest of us had to sacrifice them? And that looks like a fracture in the union to me. But you can't get that through Parliament. This is where the general election was designed to deliver that majority that would mean she could do pretty much anything she wanted. It went horribly, horribly wrong. And she can't get any of this through Parliament without the support of the DUP. And if the DUP is committed to anything, apart from creationism, it is the union with the rest of, well, with Great Britain. So I have not got a clue what's going to happen next. Feel free to have a pop at my fag packet analysis or offer up your own. The question I've got for you, broadly speaking, is what's going to happen next? 0345 6060 973. What do you think is going to happen next? It could be big in the next 2 weeks. We could have some real shifts in the tectonic plates. Or I could be reading the runes completely wrongly and there's another period of sort of fudge and postponement on the way. Okay, yeah, we got there in the end. It's 10:18. Brian Cox, the super scientist, he's probably got a more professional title than that, but he's, I think, barking up a similar tree to me. Theresa May is battling to avert a revolt from her top team over a Brexit customs union, reports Bloomberg. Brian Cox responds by saying, I don't think she's battling too hard. I think the golden scenario for May is to lose the vote in Parliament, which she likely will, and then be forced to chart the only sensible course. She'll claim it wasn't her fault, but a leadership challenge will be futile under these circumstances. That's the other alternative, I suppose, in that even if there are people in the cabinet who would be prepared to throw Northern Ireland under a bus in order to cling to the Brexit dream, they would never prevail. Crikey, that's an even bigger don't know. Nick's in Winchester. Nick, what's going on?
Hey, James, how are you, right?
Yeah, well, it's a rhetorical question. I mean, flourishing personally, dying slowly politically. Go on.
Well, big fan. I actually think you might have actually missed the point on this one. Actually, I think the government probably looked at this and realised it was an absolute nightmare to deal with.
Yes.
And I think their feasibility on this was, let's just not do anything on the border and see what the EU have to produce at the 11th hour. And I think David Davis has alluded to that previously. You know, their view is...
I did mention that possibility. I did say what they'll do is wait until reality becomes irresistible and then somehow try to paint the bite of reality as a choice that the European Union has made rather than the inevitable upshot of the detail and the facts.
But if the British position is they want to weaken red tape and make things and goods cheaper over this side, and then they don't actually put a border up themselves and spend their money putting the border up, then there's no reason why it would be good for a black market to transfer goods from the...
No, we wouldn't be able to, without a border, we wouldn't be able to negotiate trade agreements with anyone.
Okay, well, but that said,
especially, I mean, if we were trying to do most favoured nation status under the World Trade Organization, we'd need, I mean, a border pretty much as hard as they come.
Yeah, but they may well have taken the view that the EU will have to produce that, and then.
No, if we post Brexit, if we want to negotiate trade agreements with anyone, we need to show our trading partners what our borders are like.
Fair enough then. I missed the point there.
No, you haven't missed the point at all. You're doing, Nick, what no government minister is prepared to do in public, which is offer up your thoughts to proper scrutiny, to informed analysis. And so, please, don't apologise to me, because you're doing something that Michael Gove hasn't got the guts to do, Boris Johnson hasn't got the guts to do, Philip Hammond hasn't got the guts to do. You're doing something that Liam Fox hasn't got the guts to do, David Davis hasn't got the guts to do. You're offering up an honest view based upon your understanding to proper scrutiny and analysis, and under proper scrutiny and analysis, it will fall apart, which is why they're not coming on. And I don't expect them on this programme, but on the programmes where they normally get their tummies tickled, you can't see them for dust. You'll get a Redwood or a Duncan Smith, a Lawson or a Hannan, but you won't get anybody responsible or accountable for government policy. And we have to start asking ourselves why.
Well, you know, that new centrist pie they're talking about needs a new leader, so you probably get your CV up there, I think, at the moment.
Funny that. It's funny you should mention that. 25 minutes after 10 is the time. Nick is in Winchester. Mike is in Hemel Hempstead. Mike, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Mike.
Okay. It's going to be a bit controversial here, but you probably figured that anyway.
Why?
I think Northern Ireland should be the sacrificial lamb of Brexit, and I'll tell you for why. Unification of Ireland will happen sooner rather than later, and it's going to require some very sensible conversations and some very adult thinking from all sides of the party. Now, given that the majority of the Northern Irish voted to remain anyway, it suits them.
Well, no, they voted to remain in the European Union. They didn't vote to unite with the Republic, and we have to I just need to remind you that the government would need to get something through Parliament, and the government's majority in Parliament rests upon 10 votes from the DUP, the Democratic Unionists, who exist exclusively. Their raison d'etre is to keep the union between Northern Ireland and the rest of Great Britain in place.
Yes, I know. This is why I say intelligent and growing conversation needs to be had from all sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, but that,
it makes
I mean,
sense
with
to
respect, that
unify
doesn't mean anything. I'm telling you that you need, for the government to do what you're saying, the DUP would have to vote to do the precise opposite of what it was founded to achieve and promote. So
Yeah, I
that's
understand
just
that.
not going to happen, Michael.
But then, given that Ireland was once a whole country
When?
many years ago, was it not?
When?
All years and years ago.
Yeah, but when, though?
Then you had the Easter uprising. I mean, Ireland's not always been two countries.
It was all part of the United Kingdom prior to that, mate.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
So it wasn't one country, it was part of the United Kingdom.
Yes. But then the logic exists to unify Ireland, just as it did to unify Germany. And look how it worked out for them.
Well, I don't know what that means, Mike.
It's going to happen. It will happen probably in our lifetime, who knows? Or in your lifetime, you'll be younger than I am.
Right.
But that is the only logical step you can take. As I say, the majority of the people in Northern Ireland did vote to remain in the EU.
So did the majority of people in London.
Well, yeah, but you're not going to separate London from England, are you? That is silly.
Well, the Conservative and Unionist Party would say that it's very silly to suggest that you could separate Northern Ireland from the United Kingdom. It's the Conservative and Unionist Party. That's their official title. The Conservative Party its very existence is dedicated to sustaining the union that you say has to be broken because of logic.
Well, yeah, because the thing is, you've got water that separates us from Ireland. You know, how can you have a satellite? I mean...
What about Gibraltar then, Mike?
All right, yeah, but then Gibraltar...
And what about the Falklands?
They're self-governing.
There's a lot more water there.
Go down the other way then. Let's have...
Mate, I'm not...
independent country.
I've got a lot of people waiting to speak. I don't know that... And it's a pleasure to listen to you and to talk to you, but I don't know that you've got anything substantive at all to say, have you?
It's an idea, you know.
Yeah, no, okay. It's a rubbish idea.
You know? Well, that's your view, you know.
No, it's not my view. It's the conclusion of the fact that to get anything through Parliament, Theresa May would need 10 DUP votes, and the DUP is not going to vote for the dissolution of the Union. That's why it's a rubbish idea.
But then there's an answer to that.
I really think you should stop talking now, mate.
Okay, you obviously don't want to listen, so...
Well, no, I'm happy to listen. I'm just giving you friendly advice. No, you carry on. Have another go.
You seem to have a dogmatic view about this, James.
No, mate, I can just count, and there are 10 DUP votes that you think could be turned to the destruction of the Union. So go on, have another go.
At the moment, the answer to that would be another general election.
Well, that's where we started off saying. 10:29 is the time. I can't really see any way past that at this point in proceedings, but neither do I necessarily want to see Northern Ireland thrown under a bus of Brexiters' design, although possibly, given their history of buses, it wouldn't actually be a pledge. It would just be a suggestion on the side of a bus. It's coming out to 10:30. No offence to Mike, but you know, this is what happens. That's why Michael Gove won't do it, because as soon as you try to do it, that happens. So in the space of less than 2 years, we have gone from being a country more or less in charge of our own destiny, part of the largest single market free trade area in the history of this planet, to being a country that has control over precisely nothing, including the future of our own United Kingdom. Because as things shake down, it seems that there is looming on the horizon a straight choice between putting the border in the Irish Sea, which would be a de facto, if not political, unification of the island of Ireland, and calling off Brexit. I can't see what else there is. You cannot put a border in place. The only possible fidget we've got is, and this would tally with their modus operandi at the moment, is the idea that everybody knows that there's going to have to be an infrastructure border or no border at all, i.e. in the sea. But if we can just... If you were a Brexit campaigner, if you were a Gove or a Johnson, you stood there that day after the result came in thinking, oh my God, what have we done? Which you can see just by looking at their faces. You probably hold the British public in quite a low regard at the moment. You probably think you weren't actually supposed to vote for it, you fools. We were just supposed to use it to strengthen our future negotiating positions within the Conservative Party. So if they are sitting there now and thinking, do you think we'll be able to persuade enough people? Because we'll never persuade all the people. We can persuade enough people when reality bites that it's not reality, it's some form of heavy-handedness from the European Union. Do you think we'll be able to pull that off? You could forgive them for backing themselves on that, couldn't you? So here is the inevitable upshot of trying to marry Brexit to the Good Friday Agreement, but we'll pretend it's not inevitable. We'll pretend we haven't heard all the people who've been telling us for 2 years that it is inevitable. We'll continue to refuse to appear on any media platforms where we might be properly examined, and we'll keep sending out jokers like John Redwood and Ian Duncan Smith to do it for us, because they're neither responsible nor accountable for government policy. And when the pips really start to squeak, we'll just tell the plebs that the European Union have inflicted upon us as a punishment for having the audacity to want to leave. That is another play, I think, or another possibility. What do you think is going to happen next? Steve's in Belfast. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
I think you're right. I think an election is likely to be inevitable. And what I would like to see happen in that election is Sinn Féin say this is an election about Brexit. It's that important. We have to stop it. And for Sinn Féin to stand to one side and ask their voters to vote SDLP, what will happen then is that the Sinn Féin members of Parliament will be SDLP, and they'll be able to sit.
Members of Stormont or members of Westminster?
Westminster.
Oh, OK. How many are there again? Remind me. This isn't a gotcha question. I've forgotten as well.
I think there are either 8 or 9.
Probably enough, at least, to take the sting out of those 10 DUP members.
Oh, well, it's worse than that. They would actually, the DUP would lose East and South Belfast. Therefore, the SDLP would be the majority party in Westminster for Northern Ireland, and Theresa May then wouldn't have the numbers.
And that would, either stop Brexit? I mean, because you can portray that as stopping Brexit, but Westminster would still need to go along with that, or you would kick in that Good Friday Agreement, have a referendum on both sides of the border, and open up the possibility of unification, which is a whole new can of worms.
There is a chance that actually the Sinn Féin standing to one side is the only way they're going to stop reunification, which obviously means that Sinn Féin might not do so.
Because that is what they exist to achieve.
Because that's what they exist to achieve. So, but the only way that I can see to stop Brexit is for Northern Ireland to take back its own identity and actually say this is bad for us, and Sinn Féin step to one side.
Blimey.
Just purely for Brexit. The next election they stand, they probably win their seats back, and everything goes.
So it becomes a single issue general election.
A single issue general
in Northern Ireland. God knows what would be happening on this side of the water, but it would in Northern Ireland be a Is the feeling strong enough though? Because it wasn't a landslide to Remain, was it? There'll be plenty of people. Although I guess some people in Northern Ireland who voted to leave have had a reality check when they've tried to marry the Good Friday Agreement to the terms of Brexit, or to the terms of hard Brexit, which actually specifically nobody voted for, but now the Brexiters pretend everybody did.
That's right. They were given the message, it won't affect the movements over the border. It'll affect nothing like that, when obviously it's going to rip the country apart. Because, agriculture, you won't be able to get stuff in and out of the border. They say small firms will, but then again, small firms can't do that, really.
No, and then there's the sheer numbers. I'm going to double check this actually, because I always think I must have misremembered it. There are currently 137 land border crossings to the east of the European Union. So along the whole of the eastern border of the European Union, there are currently 137 land border crossings. Between Northern Ireland and the Republican Ireland, there are 275.
Yeah, and so it's going to be impossible to police.
It's a sieve.
So you're never going to be able to do anything at all with that. And the fact that if we do alienate the EU, it's all right, everyone saying, hey, we're going to do trade deals with the US or Australia and whatever. These are small farmers. They cannot send stuff to America. They cannot send stuff to Australia. They cannot send stuff
to India. I believe Jacob Rees-Mogg yesterday threatened Irish farmers with tariffs of 70% on Irish beef. But again, he is one of the people that goes out and talks nonsense unchallenged fortnightly now on this radio station. At least here, people can ring him up and give him a reality check. But it doesn't matter how humiliated he is by facts, because he's not responsible for or accountable for government policy. So you send out a Rees-Mogg or a Duncan Smith or a Hannon or or a Hoey, actually Hoey's on the other side ostensibly, or of Parliament, not of Brexit, or I don't know, I forget who they are. You get one of these pocket economists who turns out to have run for the leadership of UKIP 8 years ago, and they can all talk utter twaddle, more or less unchallenged. When you ask why government ministers aren't coming out to explain and defend government policy, you're left with the inescapable conclusion that at best there isn't a policy, and at worst there is, but they can't defend it.
Indeed, and we're used to that here because neither DUP nor Sinn Féin will talk to the televised press here in Northern Ireland about Stormont. So we're
Happy
used
days.
to tactic.
So much democracy, Steve. So much control.
It's wonderful. It's just as well it's such a great place to be.
Happy days. I tell you what we could do one day this week. Anyone think it's going well? 0345 6060 Anyone think it's going swimmingly? Anyone pleased with the way things are developing? Adam is in Enfield. Adam, what do you think's happening next?
Well, I seem to always come to the conclusion that actually the EU could have done something very, very simple when David Cameron went over and asked for some compromise. And they could do something very, very simple now, which would cause us to be able to ask for another vote, in that all they need to do is change the freedom of movement rules.
Mate, I've got to tell you that if you speak to anybody, you speak to anybody in Brussels, they will say to you, you're already out of Schengen and the euro. So if every government in Europe has a Euroscepticism problem, and the idea that not being in Schengen, not being in the single currency, and getting more dispensations, it was never going to fly. The only reason you thought it might fly was because you were reading British newspapers. If you'd been reading a German or a French newspaper, you'd have died laughing.
No, but I'm not saying just for us. I'm saying for everybody. And the compromise they would be offering...
But then you haven't read the four pillars. The entire foundation of the European Union is on the four pillars of freedom.
Yeah, I have read them, James, and I understand them.
So you're saying what they need to do is abandon one of the founding principles?
No, I don't think they would be abandoning it, and that's my point. If what I read and what I listen to is believed, there are an awful lot of ignorant people who voted to leave the European Union because of immigration.
But they're not necessarily ignorant. I mean, you know, they're ignorant of some facts, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, they're ignorant of the facts that, as Femi keeps pointing out, which is absolutely right because I've read the legislation, actually we could have controlled immigration within the EU rules.
We could have controlled it more.
We could have controlled it more.
And this is where I think you're probably right to use the word ignorant. We could have controlled it enough for all the people who thought we couldn't control it to realise that actually we could, but successive governments had elected not to, and this is where the problem kicks into another level. They'd elected not to because it doesn't solve real problems. It only solves, you know, ghost train and dragon designed problems.
That's right. So what I'm suggesting would merely be a sop to those people, in that if the wording, if the EU just said something like it's freedom of movement subject to limits set by national governments based on their assessment of their infrastructure capability.
Well, it kind of already is like that, though.
I know, exactly. But if the EU just came out and said the words I've just said...
I think you might be falling into the trap of being logical.
Well, yes, but no, I don't think it's being logical. I think if you say it like that, then... So even if the EU came out and said that, I think all those demands for a second referendum would become much stronger, because the EU has given us something has given us something completely immaterial.
But well then you're casting yourself as a snake oil salesman who's on the side of the angels. You're saying, look, if they can be so easily manipulated into voting against their own interests, then look, we'll throw them a relatively meaningless bone, and while they're gnawing on it, we can have another referendum. They'll vote to remain without realising that the situation hasn't actually changed in any meaningful way since they voted to leave.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I like you a lot because, I don't like... I mean, I like...
James,
what?
I voted to leave, by the way.
No, it doesn't matter anymore, Adam. What I like is your imagination and your thoughtfulness, but what I don't like, and I'm afraid I would say at this point, this is more of a leaver position than a remainer position. What I don't like is the low regard in which you hold the British voting public.
But the British voting public can't have been expected to read article whatever it was, subsection 3, paragraph 2. And come to the conclusion, having read that actually we could control immigration, and it's our politicians who haven't.
Or they've decided that these are meaningless phrases. We can disagree about that. So you would have voted to remain if you'd been aware of that part of the treaty that Femi routinely rings up LBC to relate?
No, I wouldn't.
Oh, you wouldn't have done. But you think enough other people would have done?
It's possible.
Yeah, you've lost me now, mate. So what would you do then if the European Union said, look, we're going to make a big announcement letting you carry on doing what you could have done all along but didn't realise? Would that have changed your vote?
No.
So if there was another referendum...
No, we could have.
If there's another referendum next week then, under those terms, I forgot Bill Cash, he's on Sky News at the moment, there's another person with no responsibility or authority for government policy routinely wheeled out to talk twaddle, and I say that with great reluctance because he's an old pal of mine. But what would you do in a vote next week if we did what you've just suggested?
I think I would review all of the issues that have come up.
Yeah, and when you've done that, how would you vote?
When I've done that, I think I probably would still vote to leave.
Right.
Because my opinion is we were never actually in. And if we're not committed to be fully in, then we might as well be out.
Shake it all about.
Well, to be in the European Union, we should take the euro.
Right. Okay. I mean, you did ring in to say that we should have got the European Union to give us more leeway to be even further out of it, but you would still vote to leave it because we're not in it enough.
I probably would, but I suspect people... There are a large number of people for which immigration was the issue, and for me it wasn't.
No.
I have other issues.
Sure.
And therefore, and also it gives... am I in favour of a second referendum? Probably not.
Right.
Really,
do you know, I'm late for the break. Go on.
Yeah,
I'm going to crack on. I think you've ticked pretty much every imaginable box, some of which might, from some perspectives, seem to contradict each other, but I've enjoyed listening to you. Because I'll tell you what is going out of fashion. Whichever way you sit, whichever way you swing, thinking. So what is going to happen next? And what is being put out by people who think that there is an alternative to this growing tension between, if you like, hitting Brexit on their head or chucking Northern Ireland under a bus? Brian writes, it's quite clear that your last caller still can't admit that the whole Brexit idea is farcical, despite actually having all the facts in front of him and acknowledging him. There's your main problem right now. As a nation, suspect Brian might be tweeting me from Ireland. You are so far through the looking glass, down the rabbit hole. And Sarah writes, at Mr. James O.B., your timing is impeccable, which is very, very kind of you, Sarah, but I don't actually know what you're referring to. Being accidentally impeccable, that should be the motto of the programme. 10:52 is the time. What is going to happen next? Some sort of claims that there are answers to the technological border. I'd refer you to the Northern Ireland Select Committee. That's in the sovereign British Parliament. And I quote, we have, however, had no visibility of any technical solutions anywhere in the world beyond the aspirational that would remove the need for physical infrastructure at the border. We recommend the government bring forward detailed proposals without further delay that set out how it will maintain an open and invisible border. These proposals should provide detail about how customs compliance will be enforced if there is regulatory and tariff divergence between the UK and Ireland. That's really complicated. It's also, I think, but I'm not an expert, impossible. And it is, I think, and I am an expert, why no government minister will put their head up in public to defend and explain precisely what this government's policy is. Because there isn't one. What's the opposite of a policy? An anti-policy. The government now, under Theresa May, is dedicated to defining the things that it won't do. Isn't it? I've just realised this. Policy and politics should be about telling the electorate what you will do. Theresa May's government is defined by telling the electorate what it won't do. It's defined by red lines. It's defined by Brexit means Brexit. It means nothing. We won't pull back. We won't step back. We won't do this. We won't. What will you do? No. Because if you've got a policy platform that you can persuade the British public should be pursued, you send out your heavy hitters. You send them out every day. I have been telling you for the best part of 2 years that there is no way to marry the Good Friday Agreement to hard Brexit. And if we don't have a hard Brexit, then we will... I mean, hard Brexit is the worst possible scenario, but soft Brexit, I could see, would offend people who perhaps still believe that Brexit is a good idea, because soft Brexit will turn us into precisely the country that the Brexit liars told us we already were when we were in it. It will turn us into a country that has to follow blindly laws in which it has no say. We categorically know now that we were never that, but enough people believe that we were to vote to stop being something that we never were, in order to become that thing that we never were, but will now become. Takers, not makers. Marty's in Belfast. A lot of people listening in Belfast. I'm very glad. I need your insights. Marty, what would you like to say?
James, can I start off and say I didn't understand one word of your last 15 seconds?
Do you want to know a secret? Nor did I.
Well, that's okay. That makes me feel a lot better.
I can't believe they pay me for this. No, look, I'm not going to let that go. In brief, all the things they said we were during the referendum about being rule takers, not rule makers, were not true, but the best case scenario, Brexit, would make all those things true. There you go. I could have been clearer. Now, on with your point.
Excellent stuff. There is, I think there's a potential solution that we could look at that is out there, but it would involve Theresa May allowing for a border poll in Northern Ireland.
But the DUP would need to vote for that.
Well, even if they did vote against that, which they would, I'm not convinced that the rest of the House of Commons...
no, but you have to get it past Stormont, don't you? God, we're all on crash courses, aren't we, in things that really we should have known more about in the first place. You can't have a referendum in Northern Ireland on the unification of Ireland without a vote in Stormont.
Well, we don't have Stormont. maybe that would be the perfect reason to bring them back.
Yeah.
You know, if they don't come back, we're definitely going to have it.
To vote for their own destruction.
Oh, it's a nightmare. Absolute nightmare.
Do you know what? All I could say is that at least now, those of us who all recognise that it's a nightmare don't feel quite so lonely anymore.
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
there's the positive. What would happen if there was a poll, do you think? What would happen now? Because the earlier fellow who sounded English, although he lives like you do in Belfast, he was... It was a bit of finagling going on with Sinn Féin stepping down so that SDLP can prevail. I don't know if that would ever work. But if there was a straight poll now, post-Brexit vote, pre-Brexit reality, which way do you think it would go, just out of interest, conversationally?
I think it may go for unification.
Whoa. So that would be taking our country back by slicing off one of the most historically blood-soaked and fought-for parts of it.
Yeah. I think. I mean, when you remove the extremes of the hardliners, and not all DUP voters are hardliners.
No, I accept that.
Voters are hardliners.
Mm-hmm.
I think the vast majority of people are at the stage now where they go, well, look, do you know what? I would rather stay in Europe than the UK.
Yeah, and that would be their choice, and then you'd have Wales and Scotland and various other places saying, how the hell have they? Oh no, because we would actually not be part of the UK anymore in Northern Ireland. Before you go, Marty, I just want to read you a tweet that's coming from Dean, all right?
Yeah.
I totally understood those 15 seconds, James. You summed up the situation perfectly.
Well, fair play to Dean. He's obviously a lot more intelligent than I was.
Stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Chris is in Belfast again. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'd just like to throw something to the wall and see if it sticks. The UK government gives Northern Ireland $25 billion every year to pay for everything, healthcare, everything. But Northern Ireland only gives back about 60% of that.
Yes.
And per head of the population in Northern Ireland, we get more than everyone else in the UK. We get more than Scotland, England, Wales.
Per capita.
Per capita.
Yeah.
And I think that the UK government will possibly sacrifice Northern Ireland because Northern Ireland has always been a problem. We cost too much. That there is a border problem, and we've had problems with it.
I don't want to agree with you, but I do, and I find it astonishing that years and years of rhetoric about taking back control and getting our country back would lead to chopping our country in half.
I think it's a fix that that the UK government would be willing to take. It would just
depends who's in charge. I mean, it's called the Conservative and Unionist Party, Chris.
Yes.
It's in the flipping title. I mean, what an utter debasement of democracy, transparency and truth it would be for the Conservative and Unionist Party to break the union in order to keep the Brexit balloon inflated for another couple of years in the hope that some magical solution arrives, in the knowledge that it almost certainly won't. Wow.
Yes.
Well done. So you can tell Jones the engineer's back. We got a little crescendo boom there as I dropped a truth bomb.
One more thing, just on your last
course.
caller. The population of Northern Ireland is during the last census, it's pretty much 50-50 Protestant and Catholic. And if they put it to a border poll, what the Catholics of Northern Ireland are very good at is voting and voting strong.
And I think there'll be plenty of Protestants now who don't feel, and it's an amazing thing to say for a 46-year-old man with an Irish surname, but I don't think those sectarian scars run as deep as we thought they always would. I could imagine, but I know plenty of Protestants in Northern Ireland who would prioritise Brexit above union. Chris, thank you. Amazing calls that hour. Thank you, everyone.